50,000 years ago, you were not the only kind of human on Earth. Share a river with a squat, powerfully built cousin whose face was built to warm, freezing air before it hit their lungs. Cross paths with a tiny hunter barely 3 feet tall, sharing an island with dragons. Somewhere in Siberia, a group so elusive that almost nothing survives of them but a single finger bone. And you, Homo sapiens, just one branch among several, with no guarantee you'd be the one still standing. Today, you're it. Not because your branch was the strongest, the smartest, or the oldest, just the one still here. And that leaves a question with no clean answer. What actually happened to everyone else? The truth turns out to be slower and messier than any single explanation, a slow accumulation of bad luck, shrinking room to maneuver, and a changing planet that eventually ran out of patience for every other branch but ours. Start with the one that lasted the longest, Homo erectus. They appear in the fossil record around 2 million years ago. For scale, every human accomplishment you've ever heard of, every city, every war, every language ever spoken, fits inside the last few thousand years. Homo erectus was around for a stretch of time so long that our entire recorded history is a rounding error next to it. Their bodies were the first to look recognizably human. Long legs, shorter arms, a frame built for covering ground on foot. They were likely the first human species to walk out of Africa entirely, spreading into landscapes their bodies had never evolved for and figuring it out anyway. Their brains were slightly larger than ours, but a real leap beyond anything before them, and their stone tools barely changed for hundreds of thousands of years. That sounds like a lack of imagination. It's closer to the opposite, a design so effective there was no pressure to improve it. But even 2 million years of success eventually runs out of room. Their final populations ended up isolated on the island of Java, cut off from the mainland with nowhere new to go. The forests they depended on shrank, the animals thinned out. With no way to reach other groups and no fresh territory to fall back on, a species that outlasted almost anything the planet could throw at it simply ran out of options. Their last known fossils date to around 110,000 years ago. Now the Neanderthals, probably the single most misunderstood species in this entire story. For decades, Neanderthal was shorthand for dim and brutish. That was never accurate, and every new discovery makes it less so. Their bodies were compact and powerful, wide chests, thick bones, strong arms built for close-range struggle. Heavy brow ridges and large noses warmed the air before it hit their lungs. Their brains, on average, were slightly larger than ours. They hunted large, dangerous animals up close, which is why Neanderthal skeletons show injury patterns that mirror modern rodeo riders. They controlled fire, they made sophisticated tools, and there's real, growing evidence that they buried their dead with something that looks like a lot of care. They held Europe and Western Asia for more than 300,000 years. Then, around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens started moving into the same territory, and for several thousand years, the two species didn't just coexist. DNA confirms they had children together.
But sharing the landscape came at a cost. Both species were hunting the same animals and competing for the same land. Homo sapiens tended to live in larger groups with wider social ties, which meant knowledge, resources, and support could move across long distances when one group ran into trouble. Neanderthal groups were generally smaller and more isolated, harder to resupply, harder to recover once things went wrong. Layer in a climate that kept swinging between brutal cold and relative warmth, reshaping the map under everyone's feet, and Neanderthal populations kept shrinking and fragmenting. Their DNA shows unusually low genetic diversity, a signature of numbers that were already in decline. By around 40,000 years ago, they're gone from the fossil record. Not wiped out in one event, worn down by competition, climate, and shrinking numbers happening at the same time. Then there's the Denisovans, and this is where the story gets genuinely strange, because we can barely see them at all. The discovery starts with one finger bone pulled from a cave in Siberia's all-time mountains, small enough to sit in your palm. When researchers sequenced DNA from it, it didn't match Neanderthals, didn't match Homo sapiens, didn't match anything on record. It was something else entirely, an entire branch of the human family tree that had been hiding in the genetic data the whole time. Since then, the physical evidence has barely grown. A few teeth, a jawbone fragment recovered high on the Tibetan plateau, and not much else. And yet, their genetic footprint is massive. Denisovan ancestry still shows up across parts of Asia and Oceania today, with some Melanesian populations carrying as much as 6% Denisovan DNA. Tibetans inherited a Denisovan gene called EPAS1, which lets them function at altitudes where most human bodies start to fail. Think about that. A species we can barely find in the ground is still actively shaping how living people survive in thin air right now. As a living population, though, the Denisovans seem to fade out somewhere around 30,000 years ago. Their range may have stretched wide, but their numbers were likely thin, and thin populations rarely hold on once the world shifts beneath them. And then, one of the strangest chapters in this whole story. In 2003, on the Indonesian island of Flores, researchers uncovered the remains of a human species unlike anything seen before, barely a meter tall, with a brain roughly the size of a grapefruit. Plenty of scientists were skeptical at first, some arguing these were modern humans with a growth disorder. But the evidence kept mounting, and it became clear this was a genuinely separate species, Homo floresiensis.
This tiny human shared its island with Komodo dragons, giant storks, and dwarf elephants, because islands do strange things to evolution. Cut a population off long enough, and big animals shrink while small animals grow. Homo floresiensis may be one of the most extreme examples of that process anywhere in the human family. Their fossils run from roughly 100,000 to 60,000 years ago, with stone tools suggesting a presence as late as 50,000 years ago, right around when modern humans were arriving in the same region. We don't know exactly what happened next, but on a small island, a species doesn't need a catastrophe to vanish. Sometimes a small, isolated population under new pressure just quietly runs out of time. So why are we the ones still here? The easy answer is intelligence. It falls apart almost immediately, because Neanderthals were intelligent. Denisovans adapted to some of the harshest environments on the planet. Homo erectus outlasted us several times over. Homo floresiensis survived conditions that would break a modern person in days. What may have actually set us apart is harder to measure, the way we built connections across distance. Homo sapiens didn't just live in groups, we built networks. Tools, techniques, and knowledge moved between communities in a way that doesn't seem to have happened at the same speed or scale for anyone else. When one group hit a crisis, what they'd learned didn't die with them because it had already traveled somewhere else. When the climate turned and entire regions became unlivable, we had the flexibility to reorganize because we were never locked into one place or one strategy. Even that's only part of the answer. Luck, geography, and simply having enough numbers in the right place at the right moment mattered just as much. We weren't destined to be the last one standing, we just happened to be. None of the others were early drafts of us or stepping stones on the way to becoming Homo sapiens. They were their own complete versions of human, each one solving the problem of survival in a different way. Homo erectus held on for almost 2 million years and still disappeared. Neanderthals endured hundreds of thousands of Ice Age extremes and still vanished. The Denisovans left behind almost no bones at all, and traces of them are still written into living people today. For most of human history, we were just one branch in a much larger family tree. We just happened to be the only one left to tell the story.